Well, hello, it's Richard Pears from FinextraTV, and we're doing an interesting interview today. We're reviewing a film which is called Review of Banking on a Wilder Tomorrow, which is a film inspired by the award-winning six-part natural BBC series Wild Isles, Saving Our Wild Isles, presented by Sir David Attenborough. And I'm joined by Bevis Watts, who's the CEO of Triodos Bank, who features in that follow-on film. And we're going to talk about the film and why it was made and the message it's trying to get across. So, Bevis, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Richard. I'm good, thank you. Although not as good as you, having seen you've been in the Scilly Isles recently. So.
Well, I was inspired by the film. You know, I've been around the world and it tells me that all of this nature was on our own shores. So I thought I'd go and swim with a few seals. And to be sure, it is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, must remember how important nature is to our well-being.
Oh, I mean, really, it truly is. It's quite magical. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the film, it's well, I don't know. I suppose it builds off of the magical series, which inspires us, as you say, to remember why nature is so important. But then your subsequent film, which, as I mentioned, is called Banking on a Wilder Tomorrow, takes it onto the path of how finance can actually be part of the solution of protecting nature. Tell us a bit more about it. What was your take on making the film and what were you trying to achieve?
Well, I mean, I wish I could make claim for making the film, but I can't. It was a collaboration between WWF, RSPB and National Trust and Silverback Films, who made the series for the BBC. But I was very privileged they invited me to be involved. And I was keen to be involved because I've worked in sustainable finance for a long time now, and I don't see the kind of rapid change we need to address the climate and biodiversity crises that we face. And so I'm really curious as to see the role that the arts and the creative industries can play in both connecting with head and hearts. Because ultimately, I think what you've just talked about in visiting the Isles of Scilly is what we need to remind people of and experience. This isn't just a case of trying to monetize nature and look at its economic value. We have to realize it's just intrinsically important to our own beings and our own well-being. And I hope the films do a bit of both of that. They both relate to the head and what we need to be doing consciously as organizations, but also, individuals and the fact they all need to be responsible and take action.
Yeah, and we were talking beforehand. It's in the news today about COVID and how potentially that's come from a zoonotic disease transmission, which is really as a result of us pushing into the wild areas of the world, taking wild species out, potentially eating them, etc. There are so many ways that we can feel the benefit, as you say, but also that whole COVID period was a representation of obviously a crisis which can come our way. Now, we don't want to sort of dwell too much on that, but I think some of the stats that I read about, global species in the UK crashed by 69% since the 70s. We take $10 trillion a year of value out of nature. 2% of GDP, though, is actually incentivizing behavior which is damaging to nature. I mean, if we switch the gear from the positives and perhaps some of the global, when we look at the UK, I mean, the economics, the financing of this, how would you sort of parlay this down into banking language?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we need to see ourselves as part of nature and not sort of see ourselves as a kind of economic system which nature is serving. And so ultimately, if we do that, then we have to realize that all the value we generate in our economy and as financial institutions, we are entirely reliant on nature for. And we've gone beyond sort of, individual business risks arising as a result of nature. And you don't have to look far in history to find them. You can look at the collapse of Newfoundland cod fishing industries because of overfishing. You can find umpteen places named like Oystermouth and other places where you will no longer find oysters and things. And you see things that I think are the canaries in the coal mine. If you look at the States and California, nut crops are being pollinated by literally ferrying bees around in their hives on trucks, because we've decimated the native pollinators there, and so on. So that canary in the coal mine needs to be saying these are moving beyond being individual business risks to actual systemic risks to us as a society. And you talked earlier, about COVID and potentially being the source, the sort of mutation and migration across species. That isn't new. That's been happening through bushmeat and other trades for years. But what will get us is the things we don't yet know about. And you're starting to see microplastics come through in fish and so on that we're consuming, and it will be things like that we don't yet realize are coming. So this has to be dealt with as a crisis, really, in the same way that that COVID was. And I would challenge everyone to think, is that really the response we're making, either at a country level, but at an individual institutional level in the finance sector? Are we really thinking in that way?
So we, highlight the problem. That's obviously a key part of it. What is the role of banking, and in making this film, what were you trying to make clear people should take in the banking industry to be part of the solution?
Yeah, well, both banking and the broader financial industry, because financial industry includes asset management, insurance, and so on. But if I focus on banking, because that's the part of the sector I work in, and so on. In banking can be a hugely positive part of the solution, hugely so. And ultimately, you can follow reports produced by the likes of Global Witness that show the scale of deforestation as just one example of what the banking industry is financing. And that's despite knowing whether you care about nature and well-being and biodiversity loss or not. If you just care about carbon emissions and climate, deforestation is one of the single biggest things causing both emissions and taking away one of the most important solutions. So I think setting very high bars on what banks will no longer finance, and coming up with credible transition plans that consider nature, both in terms of what they stop financing by way of destruction, but also what they can do positively to help restore nature, such as shifting the agricultural practices that they finance from intensive to more organic and regenerative forms of agriculture, and so on. Then there's a whole plethora of things that organizations can meaningfully do and get involved in.
And I think a lot of people will know that there's been a number of activities in this area for some time, and a lot of people hide behind the complexity of the regulation, or the the access to data that allows them to make a capital allocation. You're in the business of running a bank, and you're contributing to positive change. What would you say to the people that are perhaps large and coming to this anew? Let's be fair, it's fairly new for a lot of people. Have got good intent, but perhaps are not quite able to operationalize it as well as you. What's your advice to them to be able to get going faster?
Well, I mean, that's absolutely fine, Richard. I think we live in a world where nobody has all the solutions to the issues we're dealing with. So it's absolutely fine for people to come at this anew and say, I need to learn more. Part of the intention of the films is exactly that, to provide a really easy, consumable entry point. And we recommend that it becomes part of board training programs to understand the issues around biodiversity and how they relate to financial institutions and banks in particular. And so I'd encourage people to watch it, to arrange screenings, to share it in their organizations. But ultimately, to go on a journey and really sort of start to evaluate everything they do and think, how can I be nature positive? Because that's really what this is about. It's not just a case of now minimizing harm. We have to be thinking about restoration and how we help nature recover at scale, both to address climate change, but also the risks emerging from biodiversity loss and pollution of our ecosystems as well. So yeah, that's basically how I'd encourage people to start out and not feel threatened by that in any way, but to really engage. And there are lots of initiatives. We've become involved in something called the Task Force for Biodiversity, the Task Force for Nature Disclosure, which is trying to replicate what TCFD did for carbon emissions and climate. And then there's the platform for biodiversity accounting financials also being created to try and think, how do we integrate this in the same way we're starting to do on carbon emissions and climate risks? How can we also look at nature in a constructive and consistent way?
Yeah, and I think there were some great actions, weren't there? And you've highlighted some of them there. They were talking about obviously a transition path, because some people think you've just got to stop, the bad behaviour. Obviously, there's got to be a transition. So they talk about that, don't they? And they talk about TNFD and the LEAP process. So there are processes to transition. There are steps that can be taken, which have been pretty well researched. And I know the framework's coming out soon.
Yeah.
You spoke there about doing screenings. Tell us a bit more about the screenings, which people might find a very accessible way of learning about this film.
Well, the three charities behind these films are happy to work with you to arrange screenings, and we've worked with WWF UK to do so. And if people visit saveourwildisles.org.uk/business, you can actually watch the films for free streaming, but you can also, through that website, contact WWF UK, and they will consider supporting you in arranging a screening, perhaps arranging a panel to sort of do a Q&A within your firm or within your association. If you're a representative body or whatever, then all those things are possible, and they're very happy to try and orchestrate those. We were involved several years ago also with Silverback Films and WWF in a Netflix spin-out film called Our Planet Too Big to Fail, and that ended up being screened in over 40 countries, and tens of thousands of people watch those films within the industry, and that's a similar kind of impact we hope these films will have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we did a little reviews at the time. That was part of our little contribution to that, Hannah and I. And we're going to go on and do a conference and a workshop which allows people in the fintech industry to sort of build on these themes and get their coding and their business development skills exercised with sustainablefinance.live. So I think whoever you are, whether you're just a conservationist, a consumer, a banker, whatever, there's many ways and paths that you can follow to make your contribution. You guys, Triodos, are a case in point that this is also good business, because you're getting a lot of the current account switches, aren't you? I think, is that right?
Well, we're a growing business, I think, because a lot of people recognise us and see us as a kind of leader and pioneer in sustainable finance. But I think what people need to realise is the issues we're talking about and grappling with are also a huge opportunity for people to think, well, we need to be supporting our customers in this transition. So what does that mean for the development of new products and services and expertise that we can offer? And I think we're a front runner in that respect. And people may have seen we financed some rewilding projects in the UK, which are kind of first of their kind. So heel rewilding in Somerset, but also very large land acquisition in Scotland for oxygen conservation. We've also been involved in very innovative sort of river catchment management financing in the UK. So I think you see a new sector and new opportunities emerging in this. And I hope people can also sort of apply the huge talents and imaginations we have in the finance industry to thinking about how do we solve these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you continue to be an inspiration, and thank you very much for sharing the story today of why the film was made, its purpose, and the journey that you're on and that others can follow. So for now, Bevis Watts, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. I hope everyone enjoys the film.